7 things the Bible forbids you from ever accepting, no matter who offers them. Around 1400 BC, Achan buried 200 shekels of silver and a gold bar under his tent floor. Israel lost the next battle. Around 850 BC, Gehazi chased down a Syrian general's chariot for 2 talents of silver his master had refused, and came home wearing another man's leprosy. By AD 30, 30 pieces of silver bought a kiss that ended a life. Every gift here is baited like a fishhook. What is this gift asking me in return? That question would have saved Achan's life. To understand why, you have to understand what Hiram meant at Jericho. When Israel crossed into Canaan under Joshua, God placed the entire city under Hiram, the total ban. Not a suggestion to be careful with the plunder, but a command that every ounce of silver, every bar of gold, every bronze and iron vessel belonged to the Lord's treasury alone, and nothing in that city was for any Israelite's personal use. Joshua 6:17-19. Jericho was the first city to fall in the conquest, working like a first-fruits offering. The opening tithe on the campaign meant to establish that these victories belonged to God, not the soldiers who won them. Joshua 6:24 records that everything of value that survived the fire, silver, gold, and vessels of bronze and iron, went into the treasury of the Lord's house, the very treasury Achan later robbed. Only Rahab and her household, spared for hiding Joshua's 2 spies, were pulled out alive before the city burned. Joshua 6:22-25. The one condition on that victory was that Israel take nothing for themselves. Achan ignored that condition. Among the ruins, he found a beautiful robe from Babylon, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels. Instead of turning them over, he wanted them for himself. 50 shekels of gold weighed close to 1¼ pounds, and the 200 shekels of silver beside it amounted to roughly 5 pounds of metal. More wealth than an ordinary foot soldier would otherwise touch in a lifetime of campaigns. He buried the stash under his own tent floor. Joshua 7:21, reasoning the way people always do when they take something they were told not to touch. If nobody sees it, nobody pays for it. Somebody paid for it the next morning. Israel marched on the small town of Ai expecting an easy win, instead broke ranks and ran, leaving 36 soldiers dead on the field. Joshua 7:4-5. Joshua had sent only about 3,000 men north to take Ai, confident a garrison that small would need no larger force. Joshua 7:3-4. Joshua tore his clothes and demanded to know why God had abandoned them. The answer traced back to Achan's buried silver. When the lot fell on Achan, Israel took him, his family, and the stolen loot to the valley of Achor and stoned all of it together. The robe, the gold, and the man who had wanted them. Joshua 7:24-26. Notice what the story never claims. It never says the robe was cursed, or that the silver carried some dark power that killed those 36 soldiers. Achan's sin is named plainly as treachery against the covenant, a broken promise to God and to his own people, not sorcery. Joshua 7:1. The danger was never inside the object. It was in what taking it made Achan part of, a violation he couldn't undo the moment his hands closed around it. That's the frame for this film. 7 categories of gifts Scripture says no believer should ever accept, and not one is dangerous because the object itself is haunted. A bribe that buys your integrity. Money made through someone else's obvious wrongdoing. An object built for occult practice. A gift engineered to control you. Property that was never yours to begin with. A deal that trades your silence for a payoff. And the one your own conscience already flagged, with no chapter and verse required. None of this is ancient trivia. Every one of us gets offered something we shouldn't take, and most of it never arrives wearing an obvious warning label. Every one of those 7 is the same fishhook wearing different bait, and the plainest is the bribe. Exodus 23:8 doesn't soften the warning. A bribe blinds those who see and twists the words of the righteous. Deuteronomy 16:19 hands that same warning specifically to judges, because a judge who has already taken money before he rules has already ruled, whatever the verdict says on paper. Samuel's own sons, appointed judges over Israel, took bribes and perverted justice so badly that the elders cited it as their reason for demanding a king, instead 1 Samuel 8:1-5. Centuries later, around 950 BC, Solomon compressed the mechanism into one proverb: a wicked man accepts a bribe in secret to pervert the course of justice. Proverbs 17:23. Secret is the operative word. Bribes never arrive labeled as bribes. They arrive as a favor, a gift, a professional courtesy, and the instant you pocket one, your judgment on that subject stops being fully your own. Scripture never grades this by size, either. A judge's ruling and a small favor quietly traded for someone's silence run on identical wiring. Small bribes are simply where the pattern starts before it grows teeth. You don't have to sit on a bench for this to apply to you. A bribe buys your judgment before you've made a decision. The second category is money grabbed after somebody else already made the right call in front of you, and nobody illustrates that faster than Gehazi. His story starts with his master turning down a fortune from an unlikely source. Naaman, commander of the Aramean army, a nation at war with Israel, was healed to prove God's power to a rival kingdom, not to enrich one of God's own servants. He tried to pay for the miracle outright. 10 talents of silver, 6,000 pieces of gold, no strings attached. Naaman had arrived at Elisha's door with 10 changes of clothing added to the silver and gold, plus horses and a chariot waiting outside. The full display of a foreign commander's gratitude, 2 Kings 5:5-9. Elisha refused every shekel of it, 2 Kings 5:5-15-16. He wanted it permanently clear that God's healing wasn't a transaction anyone could purchase, least of all from a foreign general grateful enough to hand over a fortune. Gehazi had served as Elisha's attendant through years of miracles, watching each one happen for free. Watching this one refused must have felt unbearable. He ran after Naaman's chariot, invented a story about unexpected guests, and came away with 2 talents of silver and 2 changes of clothing, which he hid the moment he got home, 2 Kings 5:22-24. The lie itself had specific detail. He told Naaman the visitors were 2 young prophets from the hill country of Ephraim, freshly arrived and in need of a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothes, 2 Kings 5:22. Elisha already knew. He told Gehazi plainly what he had actually purchased. Naaman's leprosy transferred onto him and his descendants forever, 2 Kings 5:27. The silver Elisha refused became, in Gehazi's hands, a disease he could never scrub off. Category 2 isn't about a coin carrying a curse. It's about money that stays filthy because it pays for something everyone around you already recognized as wrong. Gehazi's silver punished him after the fact. Category 3 punishes you the moment you start using it because it was built for exactly that purpose. Deuteronomy 1:8-10-1-2 names divination, sorcery, and consulting the dead as detestable to God. Not because the props are radioactive, but because everyone exists to bend spiritual power toward the user instead of submitting to God. The appeal was never the props themselves. It was the promise of control and hidden knowledge without the trouble of trusting anyone bigger than yourself. That's why, When a wave of new believers in Ephesus wanted a clean break from their old occult practice, they didn't quietly sell off their equipment to recoup what they'd spent. They burned it in public. Ephesus was already famous across the Roman world for this trade. Professional charms called Ephesian letters were sold to travelers from Ephesus to Rome. Paul had been teaching daily in the hall of Tyrannus for about 2 years. By that point, Acts 1:9-10, long enough for former practitioners to trust him with what they were burning. Acts 19:19 puts an exact number on the bonfire that followed their conversion. 50,000 pieces of silver, decades of an ordinary laborer's wages, going up in smoke in the city square. Nobody in that crowd shopped around for a buyer first. Trusting a talisman over trusting God is still an act of worship, just aimed at the wrong address. An object built for spiritual manipulation isn't a collectible you quietly rehome to somebody else's shelf. You destroy the hook. You don't hand it to the next fish. Burning a sorcery scroll in the town square is dramatic by design. Category 4 works the opposite way. It looks generous, patient, even admirable, which is precisely what makes it easy to miss. Absalom, King David's own son, didn't storm anybody's tent or threaten a single person. He had begun the campaign in style, riding a chariot with 50 men running ahead of him through the streets. 2 Samuel 15:1. He simply stood at the city gate every morning and intercepted people arriving with grievances for the king, greeting each one with flattery, sympathy, and a small favor here and there. 2 Samuel 15:1-6. He kept this up for 4 straight years before he ever moved against his father. 2 Samuel 15:7. Scripture has an exact phrase for what that generosity was doing. He stole the hearts of the people of Israel. 2 Samuel 15:6. No bribery in the courtroom sense, no threats at all. Just gift after gift, favor after favor, until enough people owed him something they couldn't quite name. When he finally called in that debt, it was an open rebellion that drove his own father out of Jerusalem, and it collapsed within weeks. Absalom died fleeing David's soldiers, caught by his own hair in the branches of a tree. 2 Samuel 1:8-9-1-5. Ironically, the hair Absalom cut once a year, weighing 200 shekels by the royal standard, according to 2 Samuel 14:26, was the same hair that caught in the branches and cost him his life. 4 years of small favors bought him a kingdom for less than a season. A controlling gift steals your loyalty slowly, one favor at a time. Stolen property is theft with no disguise on it, and the law treats receiving it as seriously as taking it in the first place. The 8th commandment needs only 4 words: "You shall not steal." Exodus 20:15. Leviticus 6:1-5 goes further still, requiring a thief to repay the full value of what he took plus 20% on top. Real restitution, not a quiet apology. Centuries later, the tax collector Zacchaeus modeled the opposite instinct, pledging to repay 4 times what he had cheated from anyone, going beyond even what the law of Moses required. Luke 19:8. This category closes the loop back to where the film started. Achan didn't steal from a person standing in front of him, but the principle holds identically. What belongs to someone else, even something placed under a religious ban rather than owned by one private individual, doesn't become yours simply because you got it home without anyone noticing. This settles the question people ask most. Buying something suspiciously cheap or accepting a gift you already suspect fell off the back of a truck isn't a gray area just because your own hands never touched the theft itself. The law was never interested in how many steps removed you were from the original crime, only in whether you knew or should have known exactly what you were holding. 6 categories in, it's the same fishhook every time. Bait built to look good, a barb hidden underneath. Category 6 is where that barb goes in deepest. The chief priests wanted Jesus removed quietly, and they needed someone close enough to him to make that happen without a public arrest. Judas, one of the 12 men who had walked with him for years, took the meeting. He wasn't a stranger looking for an opportunity. He kept the group's money bag and had already been helping himself to it before any priest offered him a thing, John 12:6. This wasn't a first compromise, but the next one in a habit already normalized. Matthew 2:614:16 records the number without ceremony. 30 pieces of silver, handed over, deal closed. That figure wasn't picked at random. It matched the exact legal price of a slave gored to death by an ox under Exodus 21:32. The value the law had assigned to a human life centuries earlier as compensation for a lesser tragedy than this one. It also matched a prophecy written in Zechariah 11:12, roughly 500 years before Judas ever sat down in that room. He didn't just accept a bribe. He accepted the exact price tag Scripture had already put on betrayal long before he was born to collect it. The deal was struck in secret, and secrecy carried it to the end. Around AD 30, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Judas identified his own teacher to an armed crowd with a kiss, Matthew 2:647:49. That's category 6 laid bare. A payment that requires you to hide what you did to earn it and to actively do something to someone else to collect it. If a gift needs darkness to survive contact with daylight, that darkness isn't incidental to the deal. It is the deal. That kiss didn't buy Judas any peace. It bought him a remorse he couldn't spend and couldn't return either. Matthew 27:35 says he tried to hand the silver back to the chief priests, and they refused it outright. Blood money, they called it, unfit for the temple treasury. He threw the coins onto the temple floor and hanged himself. The priests, left holding money they wouldn't even touch with their own hands, used it to buy a burial plot for foreigners, ground remembered ever since as the field of blood, Matthew 27:6-8. Neither side of that transaction ended up wanting what they had paid for. The detail that turns the scene almost darkly comic. The rule barring blood money from that treasury already existed. Deuteronomy 23:18 had banned exactly this centuries before Judas was ever born. The priests who paid him knew precisely what kind of silver it was the moment it left their hands. They simply never expected to be the ones left holding it. Every hook so far in this film has had a name. Scripture gives it directly, chapter and verse. The 7th doesn't need one because it's the category running underneath all 6 of the others. Romans 14:23 states it as a binding standard on its own. Whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. Your conscience isn't a backup system that only kicks in once the rule book runs out of pages. It's load-bearing in its own right. The 7th covers everything Scripture doesn't spell out line by line. Maybe it's a job that would require you to lie for a company you already know is dishonest. Maybe it's a loan from someone who has never once let a favor go unspent. Maybe it's simply a gift that arrives, and something in you goes quiet and certain before you've built a single argument for why. Scripture doesn't run a database of every possible scenario, and it was never going to. It hands you 6 named examples and 1 standing instruction to trust the alarm you already felt. Line all 7 up side by side, and not one of them is a cursed object. Achan's gold never glowed in the dark. Gehazi's silver wasn't radioactive. Judas's coins were ordinary currency that had already passed through 1,000 honest hands before it reached his. What connects Achan, Gehazi, the crowd Absalom, flattered at the city gate, and Judas is that each accepted something that created a debt they couldn't see at the moment they took it. An obligation, an allegiance, a silence, invisible until it was already too late to hand back. Every category in this film is the same warning stated 7 different ways. The thing in your hand is never just a thing. It's a relationship you already agreed to, whether you bothered to read the terms or not, and relationships don't stay quiet forever. Sooner or later, every one of them asks for something in return. That's why the fishhook is the right picture, not a curse or a spell. A hook doesn't need magic to catch a fish. It only needs bait good enough that the fish never thinks to check what's underneath it. Silver, status, a spiritual shortcut, flattery at the city gate, a full purse, a secret favor. Each is bait sized to fit exactly what the receiver already wanted. DHE, Gift, LWS, ask something back. Sometimes it asks slowly, the way Absalom asked for 4 straight years. Sometimes it asks all at once, the way a kiss asked in a garden at night. Either way, refusing well starts long before the object ever reaches your hands. With one question, you can run against anything anyone ever offers you. What is this gift asking of me in return? Ask it before you say yes, not after. Achan, Gehazi, and Judas all had time to ask it too, and none of them did. Every one of them found out the answer the hard way. So which of these 7 do you think is easiest to walk into without ever noticing? The slow-building, controlling gift, or the sudden windfall that looks too honest to question? Say which one in the comments, and if you want more of this kind of close reading, stick around and subscribe.